So, to absolutely nobody's surprise, FCC Chairman Ajit Pai is still very much a shill for the broadband industry, and currently, he just proposed a policy that the FCC approved that is essentially a $2 billion giveaway to wireless carriers, and at this point, he's just flaunting how much of a shill he is in our faces. So as John Brodkin of Ars Technica reports, the Federal Communications Commission today finalized an order that will prevent city and town governments from charging wireless carriers about $2 billion worth of fees related to deployment of wireless equipment such as small cells. The decision has angered both large and small municipalities, as we reported last week. The FCC's Republican majority says that limiting local fees will cause carriers to build 5G networks in rural and sparsely populated areas where it would otherwise be financially unfeasible. But the order doesn't require carriers to deploy any more broadband than they otherwise would have, and carriers already promised nationwide 5G networks before the FCC made its proposal. Comb through the text of this decision, you will not find a single commitment made to providing more service in remote communities. FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel, the FCC's only Democrat, said before today's vote. Look for any statements made to Wall Street. Not one wireless carrier has said that this action will result in a change in its capital expenditures in rural areas. The $2 billion savings is less than 1% of the estimated $275 billion that carriers will have to spend to deploy 5G small cells throughout the U.S. That level of savings won't spur extra deployment because of the hard economics of rural deployment do not change with this decision, Rosenworcel said. The FCC order suggests upfront application fees of $100 for each small cell and annual fees of up to $270 per small cell, saying that these should cover local government's costs for processing applications and managing deployments on public property. Cities and towns that charge more than that would likely face litigation from carriers and would have to prove that the fees are a reasonable approximation of all costs and are non-discriminatory. The FCC order also limits the kinds of aesthetic requirements cities and towns can impose on carrier deployments. The FCC is telling municipalities which fees are permissible and which are not, about what aesthetic choices are viable and which are not, with complete disregard for the fact that these infrastructure decisions do not work the same in New York, and New York, Iowa, Rosenworcel said. So this is just a brazen giveaway to these wireless carriers. And you can't think of it as anything but a giveaway because of the evidence. This doesn't accomplish what he's telling you it's going to accomplish. He's saying, well, look, this is going to give 5G broadband to rural areas. And look, we all want 5G. I'm one of them. Does this help with that goal, though? The answer is no. He's just simply fattening the pocketbooks of the CEOs. He's doing their bidding for them. Why? Because he wants to work for them. He came from this industry. He was a lawyer for Verizon. And when he leaves the FCC, you can bet your ass he's going to go back to the industry he came from, probably with a really fat hiring bonus. So he's doing this, disregarding local municipalities, subverting their authority in order to benefit these wireless carriers who are going to get $2 billion. That money is really fundamental for municipal governments. But for wireless carriers, I mean, that's a drop in a bucket. $2 billion? And this is the trend we've seen with Ajit Pai. He does these pro-industry policies, and he makes this argument that, well, look, this is going to help them in this way. You know, this is going to mean more money for them, but overall, at the end of the day, this will be beneficial for consumers, but he never backs it up with evidence. And good policy making sure that you're regulating the industry in a sufficient way means you have to have evidence to back up these claims. Ajit Pai never has evidence. He never presents evidence. He presents an argument, usually just an ideological argument, saying that deregulation is the best, and then that's that. Never presents evidence. And now he just passed this policy that's a brazen giveaway. I mean, why? Why do this when everyone is watching you, when we see how corrupt you are, when we see how big of a shill you are? Why do something like this that shows that you care more about wireless carriers and their interests than actually protecting consumers? Why? Why do this? I don't get it. But this is how he justified it more so. So, getting back to the article, FCC Chairman Ajit Pai said the decision has won significant support from mayors, local officials, and state legislators, and he criticized those cities and towns that oppose the FCC's decision. To be fair, there are some local governments that don't like this order, Pai said. They would like to continue extracting as much money as possible in fees from the private sector and forcing companies to navigate a maze of regulatory hurdles in order to deploy wireless infrastructure. Pai claimed that the fees carriers are charged in big cities prevent them from investing in rural areas. Again, no evidence for this. Big city taxes on 5G slow down deployment and also jeopardize the construction of 5G networks in suburbs and rural America, he said. But Pai offered no evidence that deployment decisions in rural areas are affected by permit fees in big cities. Carriers' previous actions show that savings from tax cuts and deregulation don't necessarily cause new deployment. Comcast and AT&T laid off thousands of employees less than a year ago after claiming they would create thousands of new jobs in exchange for a federal tax cut. Shortly after the FCC voted to eliminate net neutrality rules, Charter announced a meaningful decline in capital investment. The National Association of Counties and the National League of Cities also criticized the FCC decision. Over 100 local governments from 22 states filed comments in opposition to the proposed ruling during the FCC's comment period. The group said, the FCC's impractical actions will significantly impede local governments' ability to serve as trustees of public property, safety, and well-being. The decision will transfer significant local public resources to private companies without securing any guarantee of public benefit in return. And that's such an important point to make. So he's doing what he's been doing since he became FCC chairman. He's trying to tie the hands of state and local governments to make sure that they don't have as much power to regulate wireless carriers and internet service providers. He did this with net neutrality. They asked him, and they started lobbying really for the FCC during his the decision process and the comment process for net neutrality. Verizon and other lobbyists started promoting this idea that maybe the FCC should include a provision in their order that stops states from imposing their own net neutrality laws in the event they disagree with the FCC's repeal. And just weeks later, he added a provision that does just what they wanted. So it's kind of been another trend of Ajit Pai to not just do their bidding, but tie the hands of local governments to make sure that they are less effective and in some cases incapable of regulating these industries that are absolutely greedy. They have a profit motive. They're driven by increasing shareholder value. And he's making sure that they have more power and state and local governments have less power to regulate them. And at the end of the day, he's saying this is going to be beneficial to the consumer when the opposite is true. Allowing state and local governments to actually regulate wireless carriers and internet service providers, that's better for the consumer because state and local governments, they're acting in the interest of consumers because that's who gets them elected. Whereas companies like Comcast and Verizon, they're acting with the interests of their investors and shareholder values because that's what drives them. That's what corporations are motivated by. So it's just another giveaway that's surprising to nobody, but we can't not talk about this because this is still important. The FCC has been captured by the industry, and with everything that Ajit Pai does, it just proves this more and more, and it's despicable.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.